program by reciting the congregational prayer. Let us now pray together. We offer our salutations to the all-loving being who endows all beings with consciousness. We meditate on the Lord, who is the origin of the universe. Lord, thou abidest in all. Thou art all. Thou assumest all forms. Thou art the origin and goal of all. Thou art the self of all. Thou art existence, knowledge, and bliss. Salutations unto thee. May the world be peaceful. May the wicked become gentle. May all creatures think of mutual welfare. May our minds be occupied with what is spiritual and abiding. May our hearts be immersed in selfless love for the Lord. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Our story begins tonight in the presence of Rama, the teacher god, the Guru Deva. And he's instructing a group of assembled devotees before him. And he says to them, read any one verse from any Upanishad with devotion, and you will get union with me. Among the devotees present was Hanuman. And Hanuman asked the question, about moksha and liberation. And Rama explained that the only real liberation is something called Kaivalya, which is, the meaning is coming from a Sanskrit vowel strengthening of the word kevalam, which means to isolate or to be sole. And so it can translate into isolation or lonely, or not lonely, but isolated or aloneness. And so he's saying, read any one of these verses. But if after reading one verse you don't get it, read the Mandukya Upanishad. That Upanishad itself is sufficient to transmit this knowledge of aloneness. But if you haven't got it after reading Mandukya Upanishad, go on and read the first 10. And if you still haven't got it, read the first 32. And if you haven't got it yet, read all 108. And then he lists all 108 Upanishads. So this dialogue comes from the Mandukya Upanishad. So our topic tonight will be the Mandukya Upanishad. And we will try to follow Rama's instructions. It only has 12 verses, so it should be, we should be able to get to most of them. But before we look at that, I want to do a quote from Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga. And this is his commentary on the Patanjali Yoga Sutras with some Vivekananda, his translation and then his commentary. So this comes from the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, verse 51. And it says, by giving up even these yogic powers comes the destruction of the very seed of evil, which leads to Kaivalya. The yogi attains aloneness, independence, and becomes free. When one gives up even the ideas of omnipotence and omniscience, there comes the entire rejection of enjoyment and from the temptations of celestial beings. When the yogi has seen all these wonderful powers and rejected them, the goal is reached. What are all of these powers? Simply manifestations. They're no better than dreams. Even omnipotence is a dream. It depends on the mind. But the goal is beyond mind. And that's the end of the translation of the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, verse 51. So for the purpose of this talk, let us take the definition of Kaivalya, aloneness in its most extreme and limiting sense. And so what is the limiting value of solitude? Okay, I can be alone in my house with no other people there, but is that aloneness in the most limiting sense? I can have a dialogue with an internal protagonist or antagonist, even with no other beings there. And in that sense, I am still not alone. And there are other objects in the house as well. So from there, I'm still in the sense of the absolute limit, not alone. So we can easily see that a full, perfect, and complete solitude, the limiting state of this word, requires a non-dual experience. Nothing in the awareness, because if there was something else there, it would not be pure and perfect aloneness. And so the presence of these others, be they people or objects, can arise in multiple ways. They can arise from sensory inputs. The eyes bring in vibrations from the world around, the ears bring in vibrations from the world, and I create this waking state. Similarly, when we shut off all of the external inputs from eyes and ears, as we do every night, we create another world from the residual psychic energy that remains in the memories. So we create another world, and Vedanta will call this the dream state. And so either waking state or dream state, there is the presence of other beings and other objects. And so we are not alone in the ultimate state of this word. Now, in the search for the self, the Atman, the witness, the Shakti, there are many, the Shakshi, there are many words for this. Vedanta puts forth emphasis on two words, this and that. This is a demonstrative pronoun indicating that something is close by. And that is a demonstrative pronoun indicating something is further away. For example, I say this podium, but that life-size replica of Swami Vivekananda. Or I say this TV screen as compared with that TV screen because it's more remote. And so Vedanta uses a technique called neti, which translates as not this, not this. And the idea behind this particular spiritual approach is to separate and reject every observable as not being the true self, the Atman, the witness, the Shakshi, that which we desire to realize. And so we observe something and say, not this observable, not that observable. And so that's not the true self. So the podium is an observable, and therefore it's not me. And this shirt is not me, and likely, I imagine, there are no objections with my logic so far. But then when we get to the skin, I say, that is also not me. And some people may begin to question that. But if you think about it, the skin and even the bones and blood turn over periodically every so many months or over so many years. So the skin that is here today and the blood and the bones were not the skin that was here today, years ago. But the witness experienced that change. I can remember a sunburn from years ago or something like that. So the witness remains the same, but the materials keep changing. So Vedanta rejects the entire physical body as being the not self, not this, not this. Thoughts, too, are observed to come and go in the mind. The thought of today is not the thought of yesterday. My thoughts as an adult are not the thoughts I had as a child or teenager, and the same for mostly everybody, I believe. And so because thoughts can rise and fall in the mind, they are observable. And there's a witness which watches them come and go, that forms the continuity between the different thoughts. And so they too, according to this Vedanta neti, also must be rejected as not the self, not the witness, not that which is to be realized. Give it any name that you wish to name it. And so by continually applying this process, neti, you can see that ultimately we have to reject all concepts, all ideas, all thoughts, all feelings as being something that's part of the witness or part of the self. And this practice is one way of moving the practitioner closer and closer to this true solitude or this true isolation in the limiting sense. And this practice is also known as vivekya, which means discrimination. And so I'll come back to Swami Vivekananda and another quote from his Raja Yoga book. This is verse 24. For the discriminating, the perception of the mind as Atman, as self, as witness, as Shakshi, ceases. It's a very important point. For the discriminating, for those who take the time to analyze and follow this process, the perception of the mind as self ceases. We no longer associate the true witness with the fluctuations of the mind. Then, verse 25 in Patanjali, then bent on discriminating, the mind attains the previous mentioned state of isolation, of kaivalya. Thus, the practice of yoga leads to discriminating power, to clearness of vision. The veil drops from the eyes and we see things as they are. We find that nature is a compound and is showing the panorama for the witness. We see that the nature is not the Lord, that all combinations are simply for the sake of showing these phenomena to the Purusha, the enthroned king within. When discrimination comes by long practice, fear ceases and the mind attains isolation. So I do want to point out at this point that the word discrimination as used by Swami Vivekananda and in Vedanta does not mean bias, prejudice, or unjust treatment of others, which is sometimes the way it is used in especially social and political discourse. It just means a careful consideration of the facts and coming to the proper conclusion, especially in matters regarding wisdom and truth, but you can discriminate in any matters at all. So perhaps the word discern could be used as an alternative if the word discrimination makes you uncomfortable or causes confusion in any way. But returning to our theme, so recall Rama's answer to Hanuman. The only real liberation is kaivalya. The way reading Mandukya Upanisad is enough. So let us see now how this idea of complete solitude, this non-dual solitude, may be established using the reasoning we find in the Mandukya Upanishad. So we'll take up some verses. So we saw that the Mandukya is number 6 in the list of 108 Upanishads. And it was kind of interesting because the list of 108 shows up in the 108th Upanishad, but then it refers back to number 6 as being the place you could stop. So who would ever read the 108th Upanishad is a question for a different day. But anyhow, it has 12 verses, and they discuss Om and something called the 4 quarters or the 4 padas of Atman, and since Atman is Brahman, the 4 quarters of Brahman also by A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, that kind of logic should apply there. And then the Karika, which is Gaudapada's commentary. So it's interesting, Mandukya has 12 verses, but then Gaudapada took 99 verses to explain the 12 verses. So there's a lot of very subtle reasoning and a lot of contemplation that has to go on to really get the full understanding of just the 12 verses. And in terms of the lineage, Gaudapada was the guru of Govinda Bhagavatpada, who was the guru of Adi Shankara, who was the founder and organizer of modern-day Advaita Vedanta, and Advaita Vedanta is the non-dual Vedanta. And so now we'll take up a few verses. Verse number 1, Harihi Om. Om, the word, is all, past, present, and to come. Om is all that which is even beyond time. And so this first verse, which talks about Om and the word, on January 26, Swami Yogatmananda gave an entire Sunday lecture titled The Word Here, and it was a 1-hour talk. And so I think that would be considered a comprehensive discussion on this one particular verse. So I won't repeat a lot of the talks made in Swami's talk, other than to mention that vibration or the word is considered the essence of all manifestation. Physics says so, Vedanta says so, and the New Testament says so. And so we'll revisit this verse one more time near the end of the talk. But for now, I want to go on to Mandukya Upanishad, verse number 2, which says, all this is Brahman. The Atman itself is Brahman. The Atman has 4 quarters, the implication being that Brahman has 4 quarters. But does it really mean, is that the real intent of this verse, is to say Brahman or the Atman has somehow divided into 4? And if yes, then of course we have multiplicity, which directly contradicts Advaita Vedanta, its assertion of a non-dual reality. So the answer either must be no, or Advaita Vedanta must be wrong. So then what does it really mean? And what they're really talking about is here 4 fields of activity related to the witness consciousness. So what I have here is a depiction of the daily cycle that most people admit to experiencing. So you can see the sort of that brain icon going around in what I'll call the daily circle, from waking consciousness on the left to dream consciousness up right about there, and then into dreamless sleep, and then back to the waking state. That's what is intended. But in the center of that is something called Turiya, the realization of which is the goal. But we don't easily realize it because it is covered or hidden by these other fields of activity. And so now we'll see how the Mandukya Upanishad describes each of these 4 states. First, it describes the waking state. The first is the waking state. The witness is conscious of an external world of objects. The state has 7 limbs and 19 mouths, and the witness enjoys objects of the external world. The second is the dream state. The witness is conscious of the internal world of objects. The state also has 7 limbs and 19 mouths, and the subject enjoys subtle objects of the mental world. And for both of these, the Upanishad claims that there are 7 limbs and 19 mouths. And that sounds quite fantastic for us. But the 7 limbs that are listed in the Upanishad are the 5 principal elements of yoga, which is ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And then to those 5, it adds 2 more, the heavens and the sun. And so that is the makeup of the cosmic being as described in this Upanishad. And then the 19 mouths are well documented and described in a lot of yoga books. First, there are the 5 organs of perception that we're all familiar with: the eyes, the ears, the mouth, the taste, the tongue, the skin for touch, and the nose for smelling. So the 5 senses that we're all familiar with. Corresponding to the 5 senses are the 5 kama indriyas, the organs of reaction. Okay, so the mouth for speaking, the hands for grasping, the feet for walking, the organ for elimination and for procreation. So corresponding to the 5 inputs is the 5 reaction of the 5 actions. And in between those 2, there's some subtle energy that processes it, and so there are 5 subtle energies within the body, so that's 5, 5, and 5 is 15. And then to that, the science adds the mind, the intellect, the ego, and the emotions. So 3 times 5, 15, plus 4 is 19, and that makes the 19 mouths feeding inputs into the witness. Okay, so that's how it is described. For both the waking state and the dream sleep state, these are the same. And because these are all observables by the reasoning of neti, we have to reject all of those as not being the ultimate witness. These are just inputs to the witness. The way the mouse or the keyboard is an input to a computer, but it's not the processing unit or even beyond that, okay? Now we come to verse 5, which describes the dreamless sleep state. And it says there, no objects are desired, no dreams are created or seen. All experience is unified, undifferentiated, homogeneous, but it is the gateway for projecting consciousness into the dream state or into the waking state. And in that sense, this dreamless state is the Lord of all, the knower of all, and is that from which all things originate and into which they finally dissolve. So that covers the three states that are common for most of us. Then the Mandukya goes on in verse 7 to describe what they call the Turiya state. It says, it is not that which is conscious of the external world, not that which is conscious of the internal world, not that which is conscious alone or a mass of consciousness, nor is it unconscious. But it is also not observable by any sense. It is unable to be inferred. It is unthinkable, indescribable, and the negation of all phenomena. It is peaceful, blissful, and non-dual, it goes on. And this, it says, is the Atman to be realized. So it's kind of interesting here that a lot of the description of this state, because it's really unable to be described, is negation, right? It's not observable. It's uninferable. It's unthinkable, indescribable. So there's no attribute assigned to it yet. But then it concludes, the Upanishad concludes. It is peaceful and blissful. It is non-dual, and this is the Atman to be realized. And so really the essence of all Advaita Vedanta is clearly stated in this one verse. The goal is not anything that can be the object of thought or detected by any of our sense organs. It is not a specific sight or a specific sound or a touch sensation or a taste or a smell. It says that it's the negation of all phenomena. In other words, a complete, imperfect isolation or aloneness. That is what is to be realized. Okay, so we're about 22 minutes in, and we've already covered about 7 of the 12 verses. So we're more than halfway to full illumination. Of course, I'm joking a little bit, but obviously intense meditation and study of these verses is required to really realize them as truth, right? We can get an intellectual grasp of it fairly quickly, but the realization of these highest states requires some dedication. So to help us with our contemplations, Vedanta uses several analogies to try to explain the ultimate reality, which, of course, as we just read in the Mandukya Upanishad, is beyond description, and it's beyond inference and beyond thought, and ultimately the negation. So if it's beyond description, which is an important point, why do we have talks, descriptions, and discussions of this truth if it is beyond the description itself? And it's really these analogies, these discussions and explanations of the indescribable can be helpful as pointers or indicators. And really they are intended to guide serious devotees and students to a specific way of reasoning and thinking, and to encourage contemplation on these ideas. And according to Swami Vivekananda, he gives some very important advice to us. He says, follow reason as far as it will take you. Follow reason until you get something higher. And when that something higher is revealed, even that something higher will never contradict reason. And I'm just going to add my own footnote to that. That was Vivekananda up to that point. Provided that the reasoning we follow is logically correct and proper. So it is possible to abuse logic and come up with some very wrong conclusions. I'll give you a simple example, but there's a whole field of study called logic and inference and all of this. But let's say I say all elephants are mammals. Okay? Chet is a mammal. Therefore, Chet is an elephant. Okay, so that's improper reasoning, right? So the problem there is that two subsets of a larger set are not necessarily equivalent. But by doing that, I can, if you're not careful enough, convince you that I'm an elephant. but of course I don't think I am. Maybe tonight when I go home and dream, I don't know. But that's the idea. So we have to follow reason as far as it'll take us until we get this something higher. And even then, according to Swami Vivekananda, that something higher will never contradict reason if we follow proper reasoning. So we should keep in mind that analogies, descriptions, and explanations are helpful, but they also have limited ranges, in exceeding which they can become confusing, misleading, or just funny. And this is true for all models, physics-based models, mathematical models. If you push a model too far, it can give you the wrong results or the wrong conclusion, right? So we have all models for all kinds of things, the weather and the stock market and this and this. But just understand, whenever you're dealing with a model, it's based on certain assumptions. And if you violate the very assumptions, you can come up with some erroneous results. All right, so this has been pretty heavy so far. So just take a slight, it's related, but a slight, I guess, comic relief pause here. In 1964, there was a song that appeared in the musical Mary Poppins. And it became well known in the pop culture. And the song was based on a very funny word, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Okay, so what does it mean? So the Oxford Dictionary, the Oxford English Dictionary, traced the first use of this word to a column which appeared in the Syracuse Universe Daily Orange newspaper in 1931, and the author was Helen Herman. And in her article, Helen says that this word was meant to imply all that is great and grand and glorious and splendid and superb and wonderful in one compound word. So rather than taking a whole paragraph or a whole chapter to explain this idea of great, grand, glorious, splendid, superbness, essence, they did it in one word. And the etymology of the word has been hypothesized to be derived from combinations of the following. Super, which again, Latin, above, super. Kali, which is road and beauty. Fragile, of course, delicateness. And it has roots of the words which convey discipline and pedagogy, meaning to teach, right? So when you smush them all together, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious says that there is a delicate pathway which teaches and imparts all that is beautiful, majestic, grand, glorious, and wonder-filled. Okay? And so similarly, the Vedantic sages also use short verses, word compounds, and even single words to convey such complex and grand and subtle ideas as well. And we saw that already in verse 1 of the Mandukya Upanisad. It says, Om is all this, all that which has come, all that which is yet to come. And so this one syllable Om is packed with intense meaning and extraordinary meaning. Another word which captures an important Vedantic concept is called superimposition. And reading this word, superimposition, is where I got the idea for supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. But we're going to come back and we're going to focus on superimposition now. And so to superimpose means to cover one thing with another, or to lay one thing over another. In the same way right now, the text of the Mandukya Upanishad, verse 7, has been superimposed onto that background photo of Narragansett Bay, which I took last winter. So that's superimposition, laying one thing over another thing. And so Vedanta says that the waking state and the dream state and even the deep sleep state are coverings or superimpositions which prevent us from realizing the truth. And remove these coverings and the truth shines through of its own nature. And there's a nice saying, Satyam eva jayate, truth manifests or is victorious of its own nature. And so the fundamental message of Vedanta is directly stated in verse 15 of the Isha Upanishad. The face of truth is covered by a golden disk. Remove that covering, O Son of Knowledge, so that we who are devoted to the truth may see your face. And so here I use the picture of the eclipse, because to me that verse is summarized nicely in the picture of an eclipse. You have the golden moon in front of the full blaze of the sun, and it kind of hides the full brilliance of the sun. And so remove the golden disk, O Son of Knowledge, so that we who are devoted to the truth may see your face. And so we can say that the waking state and the dream state impose themselves on the true witness and cover it up, so to speak. And so a common example used by Vedanta to explain superimposition is this rope and the snake. And so this rope and the snake, if you haven't heard it, or to make the talk completely standing alone, I'll tell you how it goes. It says, imagine you were working out in the yard one evening late and the sun's going down. It's already dusk and it's dark now, and so you go to your shed and you put your tools away, or you attempt to put your tools away. You open the door to the shed and you see a large snake coiled up in there, and you drop your tools and you run away saying, boy, that was a big intimidating snake. So I'll go back tomorrow and chase that snake away, but I don't want to deal with it in the darkness when I can barely see what I'm doing. And of course, when you return in the daylight the next day, you see what appeared in the twilight to be a snake was actually just a coil rope, which you had put there earlier and completely forgot about it. So, where did the snake go? Vedanta would ask. And Vedanta would answer, didn't go anywhere. It was never there in the first place. And so, as I mentioned, all these analogies have their limits, and this one has a very amusing limit. It says that after years of spiritual practice, all of the study, all of the yoga, all of the discipline, and the morning spent in meditation, the moment of realization, the very culmination, the cover of this ignorance is removed. I've been sitting there for all eternity, and for all eternity to come, looking at a $3 piece of rope. Okay, so again, I'm teasing a little bit, but again, if you push the analogies too far, because this one, when the snake is gone, although we properly resolve it, we see the rope. There's still a bit of dualism there, right? The rope is still there. Again, I'm teasing, and the idea is it's actually quite good at explaining this idea of superimposition. But since I'm nitpicking at Vedanta analogies, there's one more that I want to beat up on a little bit, or at least have some fun with. And that is this idea of the movie and the screen. And so the movie and the screen analogy is used to explain superposition as well. How the witness, the self, the Atma, and the Shakshi is unaffected by the various scenarios which play across the awareness, whether in the waking state or the dream state. And so now the rope and the snake, you see, that left us with a hint of duality. It was me and this one other thing. Not too bad. Almost total aloneness, almost total isolation. Just me and a snake. Or actually it's a rope, right? So I can probably spend all eternity with just a rope. It's probably not too bad. But this one is full multiplicity, right? Because you need a source or projector of the light. You need some film flying in front of that light to produce images. You need a screen on which that filtered light then lands. And then you need at least one observer who is different from the projector and at a position offset from the screen in a position to view the scenario, right? So again, I'm teasing, but the point here is to reinforce the idea that analogies and descriptions, while may be helpful, they can be and likely are conceptualized and internalized differently by different people, by different listeners. So the potential for confusion or error exists, especially, again, if we take them too literally or we try to stretch the logic a little too far. But they are effective in conveying the basic idea if you use the proper reasoning. So now, before we get to the culminating points of the talk, I want to revisit the rope and the snake analogy again. But I want to take up the snake's perspective. and take it up from the point of view of the snake itself. And probably you're thinking, all right, Chet, now you're even being more ridiculous than you usually are. Okay, what could we possibly learn by considering the point of view of a non-existing snake? It's a good question. But I think we certainly could learn a lot about the life of the snake, the many traits and characteristics of the snake. We could ask what it eats, how many scales make up its multiple colors, how many friends it has, how often it sheds its skin, is it married, is it nocturnal, is it diurnal, can it swim? You know, and many such details which would define a specific species of snake. But I wanted to focus on the psychological attributes. Okay, so being a sentient creature, the snake would have certain instincts and certain characteristics. The strongest is the one that is fundamental to all living creatures, self-preservation and the will to exist. And so the snake's behaviors, therefore, first evolve to those which will allow it to live and thrive in the environment in which it's placed. But then slowly over time, they might continue to evolve into an increasingly complex hierarchy of needs, perhaps similar to the ones described by Abraham Maslow. And again, you're probably even thinking more, how much nonsense are you going to tell us, you know? The non-existent snake doesn't get married and doesn't have primal needs. And you'd be both right and wrong, I suppose. Right because the entity is a non-existent snake, but wrong because it's my story, and I'm the one inventing the rules for what material I include in the talk. And so I'm allowing this talk to advance some assumed behaviors and fanciful descriptions for a non-existing entity. Author's privilege, right? What do they call it? Author's license. Okay, but now, let's continue. Let us consider now the waking state ego in us, which according to Vedanta is as unreal as the superimposed snake. And this ego, too, has developed tendencies and habits of self-preservation and self-promotion. And therefore, it establishes a hierarchy of needs and then a set of behaviors to support this hierarchy of needs. So our actions are fueled by a desire to further or advance some cause or some assumed purpose of this waking state ego in exactly the same way as the behaviors and actions of the unreal rope snake are designed to ensure its existence and further its evolutionary purpose. And so beyond survival, a significant driving cause for the human ego, of course, is the search for unending and permanent happiness, something that we all want and something that Vedanta continually points out, that all beings are in search for unending, unlimited happiness and bliss. So I think by considering the rope and snake analogy from the snake's perspective, we get some sense of what human activity might seem like when observed by sages who know the highest truth as proposed by Vedanta from their own experience. They observe us with all of our machinations and our hopes and our pursuits of name and fame and fortune and everything that goes with it, and our assumptions of supposed happiness, which are thought to derive from all of these things. And therefore, the sages call the rules and behaviors of ordinary life as niscience or lower knowledge or even false knowledge, and just an amusing play of the unreal. Recall the story of the god Indra in the Hindu mythology, who took birth in a pig's body. Indra got so attached to this pig body, he had a pig wife and pig children, and he did not want to leave that life. He got so attached to the joys and happiness that life brought. And somebody came and said, wake up, don't you realize you are a god? Regain your prominence and power as a god. And I think in the ended up they had to slay it and let Indra out. But the sages would say, such is the power of this maya, this avidya, this ignorance, that we're reluctant to let go of these lesser things to pursue the truth. But we want to see the truth. We want to experience the truth. And when the illusion of the snake goes away, we see the rope as it is, and the truth shines through. And so when this notion that the waking state and the dream state are real goes away, we will see the truth. And so the lower science of worry, of searching, of false hopes and strange ambitions begins to fall away with earnest spiritual practice. And it leads us towards this higher knowledge. And we remember what we saw in Swami Vivekananda earlier. When one gives up even the ideas of omnipotence and omniscience, there comes the entire rejection of enjoyment and the temptations of celestial beings. When the yogi has seen all of these wonderful powers and rejects them, the goal is reached. What are these powers? Simply manifestations. They are no better than dreams. Even omnipotence is a dream. It depends on the mind. And when I read that verse, that's Patanjali, it reminded me of the story that appears in Matthew chapter 4, verses 2 through 10. You see, the life of Jesus is kind of absent in that scripture from the time of 13 to the time of 30 years old. And then when he gets to be 30 years old, the next record of it is he appears on the River Jordan, and John the Baptist is there baptizing people with water. And Jesus approaches him, and now if you don't understand the word baptism, you can think of the word initiation, probably similar concept. And Jesus gets baptized or initiated by John the Baptist, and immediately he hears the voice from heaven and a dove of light. And then he goes immediately to the desert, isolation, aloneness, solitude, to meditate. And there he has visions, and these celestial beings, most famously the Satan or the Hasatan, appears and says, oh, if you bow down before me, you see that, you can have kingdoms unending, you will be the king of the world, and this and that, and change these stones into bread because you're hungry, which can have multiple meanings besides just food. But anyhow, he was tempted over and over again, and he rejects them all, right? And so that's what this Patanjali verse says. When the yogi has seen all these wonderful powers and rejected them, including the temptations from celestial beings, then the goal is reached. Okay, so let us go on. In Vedanta, there are two problems. One is the fundamental problem, or the root problem, which is called non-apprehension of truth, called avidya, ignorance, or maya. And the related problem is misapprehension of truth. So seeing the rope as a snake is misapprehension, but not recognizing it at all is the non-apprehension. And if I were to take that same rope, which may be coiled and looking like a snake, and just stretch it out across the ground, you may confuse it with a crack on the floor or a fallen tree branch, right? No longer a snake, but that's still misapprehension, seeing something for what it's not as something else. And so, we take these objects and senses and we create a world around them, basically. In the same way we created the world around that non-existing snake. And so, in addition to objects, the world so created has rules for the progression of time and to guide the pursuits of these objects that we desire, and rules sort of like sports, the rules of the game, which guide how the game is to be played and how points are assigned and how score is kept and everything. Kind of the rules of society are there. And in the dream state, we have both as well. We have non-apprehension as well as misapprehension, because we assume that the objects of the dream objects, are real, and we form a universe around them with different sets of rules and progressions of time and things like that, so that the dream can play out in front of the witness in the dream state. In the dreamless sleep state, however, we only have non-apprehension. So if you're following me, hopefully you're following me there. because there's nothing to misapprehend in the dreamless sleep state. There are no objects. All we know is that we don't know. And dreamless sleep is pleasurable in the sense that there's an absence of disturbance, right? So there in the dreamless sleep state, we get relief from the rules of the waking state game and its pursuit of all of its objects with its successes and frustrations. And also some relief from the dream world, where we also have nightmares and all kinds of things, or we have pleasant dreams, whatever. But we get relief from both of those. And we even get a relief from the excesses of enjoyment, because it is possible in the waking state or the dream state to have even an excess of pleasure and enjoyment. For example, you have some good food in front of you, you can eat so much, but if you go beyond a certain point, all of a sudden that pleasure becomes a stomach ache or pain, right? Becomes burdensome. And the same thing even from too much music, or playing sports for an extended amount of time. You can play for a while, but then you become fatigued. So the dreamless sleep state, we get some relief from all of these things. So in the time remaining, I want to do an analysis similar to that found in the Karika of Gaudapada. And the first is something called establishing the common observer. Okay, so I can certainly remember my waking experiences, but I don't remember any of yours. I don't remember your wedding days or your birthday or your childhood or the birth of your child if you have one, or even what you did last week. I don't think there's any argument there. And similarly, you can't remember mine. And so it's reasonable to conclude that to remember any experience, the entity which does the remembering has to be the same entity that had the experience. So for the ease of language, I'm just going to use the word witness for the rest of the talk. So the witness of the waking state will remember the waking state, and even then only certain parts of it. And the witness of the dream will remember the dream, or at least parts of it. But since we can each remember our own waking experiences, and we can each remember our own dream, and we can even remember that we slept without disturbance, Vedanta concludes that the same witness must be present in each of those three states. If the witness was not the same, the witness of the waking state would not be able to recall the dream experience or the deep or the dreamless sleep experience. And really that's simply the application of the logic which says that I cannot remember what you did yesterday, nor can you remember what I did yesterday. And at least at the level of consciousness, if it's localized to a body, that's certainly true. So I want to come back to this here again. I don't know if you're going to be able to read the fine text, so so let me give you the dialogue there, and then I'll explain what it all means. So the one in blue is saying those chilies. I don't know if you can even see that. So let me explain it first. What it is. I don't know if it's big enough. So Swami right now is in Detroit, and so this is called Swami Visits Detroit, the movie. And the lady in the rightmost side of the screen is there holding a bowl of green chilies. Don't know if you can quite see it, but she's greeting Swami Yogamananda with the green chilies. And Swami, of course, is on the left. And so one of the characters in the cartoon is saying, boy, those chilies look good. I can't wait till we go out to dinner later tonight. And the other person with that person is saying, I wonder why Swami Yogamananda always wears a hat. Okay, so my point here is that two people are experiencing what they think is the same experience, a common experience, but each will take away different elements from what you even think is a common experience, right? And so imagine a discussion how between those two people who went to see this movie and had those observations would go later that night. How nice was it that Swami was greeted with a bowl of chilies? Chilies? I didn't notice the chilies. I wonder why Swami always wears a hat. Are you sure Swami was wearing a hat? Yes, I'm sure. Well, maybe you are right. Did you like the beautiful sari the lady was wearing? I didn't notice it. I don't know why we go out together. You never pay attention to the important things. And based on my reaction from this group, you know exactly what I'm talking about now here, right? So anyhow, two people can have the same experience, same thing, but you never take away exactly the same thing from even what appears to be a common experience. And this concept is easily proven in psychology as well. They did a following experiment. They created a crime scene, and they staged it. And it was, the roles were given to trained actors, and it was designed by researchers. And the performance was done in front of an unsuspecting group who were the test subjects. And it was part of research on subjective recall. And the crime scene was well scripted, well rehearsed by the actors, and it was recorded by videotapes from multiple angles to make sure that even if the actors did deviate from the script, that the researchers would have an exact record of what really did unfold so they could see. And then they brought the people. Now, the people that were part of the test group weren't aware they were part of this this experiment on subjective recall, this psychological research. And so many different accounts were given, and even objective things such as, the color of the clothes of the victim and of the perpetrator were different from the different observers. And there's a clear objective record of what it was. And interestingly, they also found out that the people who were most assertive, the most confident in their witness statements, made more mistakes and bigger errors about what they thought they saw. So, now you start worrying about the jury system, right? But anyhow, so that was test research on that. But the point of it all is that if the witness was not the same in both, the witness of the waking state would not be able to recall the dream experience. So you have to witness both to be able to recall both. And that is Vedanta's logic and reasoning behind a common witness behind the waking state, the dream state, and the unconscious or the deep sleep state. All right, now one objection to the claim that the waking state is just another dream, and perhaps the most frequently encountered, is that dreams just simply seem less real than the waking state, right? Some people say they have a vague, ethereal, arbitrary content, random, so they exhibit qualities and attributes not readily observed in this waking state. And then on the surface, it seems like it's true. But for example, if you were to jump off the roof of a 10-story building in a dream, you may just go right through the earth, keep falling, nothing happens to you at all. Actually, I had that dream several times as a kid, probably after a day spent jumping off of roofs. If you do it in the waking state, a 10-story building, severe injury or death is almost likely, if not certain, right? So we want to take up ideas of permanence, fluidity, and time distortion, a little bit more in a simple thought experiment, and that'll bring us to the close here. So I want you to look down at the floor right now where you're sitting, and just observe the color of this floor. So we have these sort of yellowish square colors that should look very similar to the leftmost square now showing on the video screen. All right. And so that hopefully everybody's observing that and not disagreeing with my leftmost square there as a pretty good representation of this floor. And so other than minor changes due to the occasional washing or the sweeping or some subtle fading over the years, the floor has pretty much had the same appearance as it did last week and the week before and last month and last year and even a few years before. So our experience in the waking state seems to be that the material on the floor remains more or less the same from week to week, month to month, year to year. And if it's not, if we see a major change, we usually ask, well, what happened? Did somebody spill something on it? Did some equipment come through and mark it up and cause scratches, right? We expect that kind of expectation that it's the same from week to week kind of reveals our expectation in the waking state of continuity. But in a dream, however, I could ask you to look down 3 consecutive times, 4 consecutive times, and every time you look down, it could be different, right? It could be yellow one time, gray marble the next time, blue carpet the next time, and different, right? And the dreamer wouldn't even necessarily question that because it's part of the rules established by the dream world, and that's accepted by the dreamer. And science kind of explains this as depending on the part of the brains that are active in the dream, in particular, the logic processing part of the dream is less active in the dream state than it is in the waking state, and therefore we are less, the observer is less likely to call into question these kind of random and nonlinear behaviors. And so these kind of phenomenon are also common in fantasy and mythology as well, right? In Hindu mythology, we have transmutation and shifting of forms, such as Saraswati appearing as a deer, rodent, or a golden deer in the Ramayana. And so Sita sees this golden deer and asks Rama and Lakshmana to go get that deer for her, but it was actually a demon, Maricha, in disguise. And so we see these kind of things in mythology and fantasy much more similar to the dreams and the rules of progression in time and things like that. So therefore, it's tempting to dismiss the dream state as less real than the waking state. But physics already has shown that time itself is a function of the observer. Right? There's that thought experiment you might have heard. There's 2 astronauts, and they're twins. So one goes off into space, and the other one stays on the Earth. Now, it's a very far journey occurring at very high speeds, the speed of light or close to the speed of light. And so the journey, which actually took 50 years of Earth time, may come back. And the twin that was on the spaceship only aged 2 years. But the twin that remained on Earth aged 50 years, right? And that's a real thing in physics. And they've kind of shown that by using atomic clocks. They've taken 2 very accurate atomic clocks. They put one in a high-speed jet, and they left the other one on Earth, and they float around the Earth. And they could actually see a time shift, a difference in the way time was kept between these 2 atomic clocks. So even in this waking state, depending on the state of the observer, time itself is not exactly as it seems. There are also different types of dreams to consider. Vivid dreams, those tend to be more easily remembered. And then there's something called lucid dreams, which you actually realize you're in a dream. And then I also have one, which I experienced, called lucid dreams or recursive lucid dreams, which I knew I was in a dream. And I said, I got to wake up because this thing is chasing me. So I said, think, wake up. And I woke up. But guess what? I turned around, it was still there. I was still in the dream. I didn't quite get out of it. So I had to do the whole exercise again, quick, wake up, and I finally get out of it. But it's like a nested lucid dream. Okay? And again, Western science explains these as which part of the brains are active. And some dreams can occur during REM, rapid eye movement sleep, and other dreams occur during non-REM sleep or non-rapid eye movements. But yoga explains it a little differently, and this is kind of the culminating point here. So yoga explains the intensity and realness of dream and imagination and visions in the waking state as a function of the amount of psychic energy available and the level of consciousness which we attain. And I'll finish up by quoting from Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga. He says, when by the power of long internal meditation, the vast mass of energy stored up travels along the Sushumna and strikes the centers, the reaction is tremendous, immensely superior to the reaction of dream or imagination, immensely more intense than the reaction of sense perception. So understand what he's saying here. This one is a continuum. It's just a continuum based on energy. It is the supersensuous perception. And when it reaches the metropolis of all sensations, the whole brain, as it were, reacts. And the result is the full blaze of illumination, the perception of the self. And as this force travels from center to center, layer after layer of the mind opens up, and this universe is perceived by the yogi in its fine or causal form. Then alone the causes of this universe, both as sensation and reaction, are known as they are, and hence comes all knowledge. The causes being known, the knowledge of the effects is sure to follow. And I always go back to this in my studies and in my talks. I think it's a very powerful verse in explaining these phenomena of dreams and visions and the waking state, as well as the method for supersensuous knowledge. And so all of the experience of duality, multiplicity, all dream objects, all objects in imagination, or those that rise from stimuli, dissolve in this full blaze of illumination, dissolve in the perception of the self. And since they are all consumed, then we are truly alone. We experience this Kalvaya in the highest non-dual sense. And so all objects of multiplicity and duality are equal in this sense. They all contain a false promise to deliver the permanent happiness which we all seek. But happiness is not in any of these objects, of either the waking state or the dream state. It is our prior mental conditionings which superimpose the notion that any object, dream or otherwise, can deliver the ultimate happiness to us. So thus a waking state derived from sense nerve inputs brought into the by the five senses, or is no different really than a dream universe derived from residual thought vibrations and excited by this extra psychic energy. And both are finally dissolved, ultimately dissolved, in a blaze of final illumination. So with that, that will conclude our talk for the evening. Vishwanath, you can begin your collection. I'll read the announcements, and Srikant can start the puja. Charlie, can you just advance that one more time, please? Okay. Okay, the announcements for the coming week. This coming Tuesday, March 10th, the talk will be given by Abhijit Sarkar on Sri Ramakrishna at Dakshineshwar. On Friday, the class will be given by Srikant, his continuing series on stories from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Next Sunday, the talk will be given by Swami Savapriyananda of the Vedanta Society of New York, a very popular Swami who lectures on Vedanta topics, and the subject will be the Atman, a philosophical meditation, and that will be next Sunday, the 15th. There's an upcoming spiritual retreat on Saturday, April 4th from 9:30 to 7 p.m. It's a day-long retreat by Swami Tatwamayananda, head of the Vedanta Society in San Francisco. And his topic is dialogues from the Brihadaranyaka Upanisad. Pardon my pronunciation if I didn't get it exactly correct. That requires prior registration, and you can either see Naomi in the corner or do it online. The information is available on the website. The fee is $30, but it's $20 if it's paid before March 27th. Swami Yogatmananda, as you should have seen in the slide if it was large enough, is in Detroit. He'll be back tomorrow, I believe, and then he takes shortly after that, he takes off for a trip to Southeast Asia. Let me see. I think that is the announcements for the week. So with that, let us do the closing prayer. May the divine, who is Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Great Spirit of the Native Americans, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the all-loving being manifest unto us and grant us abiding understanding and all-consuming divine love. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. After the arati, you're all invited downstairs for our traditional soup supper, and then meditation back in this room at 7 p.m.